John J. Schultz, Schultz.
You may proceed.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Would you please tell us, how are you employed?
Excuse me?
How are you employed? What do you do?
Oh, I'm an associate professor of anthropology at the University of Central Florida.
And how long have you held that position?
I started at UCF 2003 as an assistant professor and was promoted 2009, 2010.
And in what department do you work?
Anthropology?
Do you have a subspecialty within the field of anthropology?
Yes, through my education, my specialty would be forensic anthropology, forensic archaeology.
Okay. Can you just give us some of your educational background in that field that led you to your present position?
My undergraduate degree is from State University of New York at Stony Brook. The degree is in anthropology.
Let me ask you, for benefit of the court reporter, slow down just a little bit.
Okay, no problem.
You tend to talk just a little bit fast.
All right. My undergraduate degree is from the State University of New York at Stony Brook. The degree is in anthropology. My focus was biological anthropology. I have a master's degree in human biology from University of Indianapolis. For that program, we focused in human anatomy, skeletal anatomy, forensic archaeology, as well as taphonomy. I have a PhD from the University of Florida in anthropology. My specialty was forensic anthropology, forensic archaeology, and while at the University of Florida, I spent 5 years at the Human Identification Lab, which is a forensic anthropology lab.
Tell, if you will, what the difference is between forensic anthropology and forensic archaeology.
Okay. As a forensic anthropologist, my specialty in that area would be study of the human skeleton. So we have courses in human anatomy, human skeletal anatomy, human variation, other types of biological courses. For a forensic Sure. The whole answer? Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Sorry about that.
That's all right. We'll remind you.
Okay.
You're not the first.
Can you please repeat the question?
My God, I can't remember it. I think I was just asking you the...
Between
Yes.
forensic anthropology and
forensic archaeology.
Okay. All right. As a forensic anthropologist, our specialty would be studying the human skeleton. As a forensic archaeologist, we would have a specialist dealing with going out to the field, working with law enforcement, collecting skeletal remains, interpreting taphonomy at the site. Within the definition of forensic anthropology, locating and recovering human remains is part of that definition. I also include myself as my specialty because my research area has specifically been in forensic archaeology and field methods.
And you used a term called taphonomy. What is taphonomy?
Taphonomy is studying what happens after a body's been, after death. So that could be studying changes to the skeleton itself, but changes how the skeleton may have been dispersed at a site.
All right. You mentioned that you spent 5 years at the Human Identification Laboratory. Could you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that is, what they do there?
There are a number of prominent PhD programs in forensic anthropology in the United States where they have laboratories where they do numerous cases. So the lab at the University of Florida is known specifically for providing a service throughout the state of Florida to medical examiners, even the state archaeologists, that when there are skeletonized remains, they can be sent to that lab and analyzed. And so as a graduate student, that's a wonderful place to go to school because there's a continuous flow of skeletal cases, and that would be part of our training as a graduate student.
So you actually get cases from all around the state of Florida that come through the laboratory at Batesville?
Most of the state. There are more people now that work in the state, some of which have come out of that lab that may be doing some of those localized areas, but that state deals primarily with the University of Florida.
And who did you study under at the...
While I was at the University of Florida, I studied with Dr. Anthony Falsetti was my dissertation advisor, and Dr. Michael Warren was also in residence there while I was a graduate student.
Is there a particular area in forensic archaeology that you specialize in?
Yeah. My specialty, would be detecting human remains. My dissertation involved using ground-penetrating radar, which is a tool used in archaeology. It's also used in many other areas, and it's a remote sensing tool, non-invasive. So we're going to use the tool to try to locate changes in the ground. And one change in the ground could be a burial at a cemetery. It could be an archaeological site. It can also be a possible grave. So my dissertation and the research I continued at UCF has involved using remote sensing tools, particularly GPR.
All right. Now, when you came to work at UCF, did you enter into a working relationship with the medical examiner, the District 9 medical examiner?
Yes. When I first arrived at UCF, I was making contact with the local community to continue doing forensic work. As part of a professor, it's expected at UCF, UCF's a metropolitan university, we are expected to work with the community. And all of the professors I've worked with have worked with the community. So it's something that would be expected from us. So I made contact with the medical examiner as well as the sheriff's department. And I was able to start doing skeletal cases and assist with recoveries on an as-needed basis.
Now, prior to your coming to UCF and making yourself available to the local law enforcement agencies, was there a local forensic anthropologist working here, or did they have to call people from Gainesville?
Dr. Dupre is a biological anthropologist at the university. She's primarily bioarchaeologist. She studies skeletal remains from archaeological contexts. I think she probably did. Oh, no problem. Sorry about that. All right. Dr. Dupre, who is primarily a bioarchaeologist, would also do some of the forensic work. I think she did a few forensic cases. Okay. And then I think they also had sent some cases to Gainesville.
Okay. But there wasn't a local forensic anthropologist until you got here to fill that.
But she was at the university, but she wasn't working with the scope of the types of cases that I do with the medical examiner.
All right. So did you develop a relationship with the medical examiner's office where you would be their sort of on-call forensic anthropologist if they needed it?
Yeah, so I served as a local resource with them. So if skeletal remains were found, they could call me up and I could be readily available based on my schedule at the University of Central Florida.
Now, around December the 11th of 2008, did you receive a notification from the medical examiner's office that your services might be needed?
I received a phone call from Steve Hansen, and I think Dr. G had also called me that day.
And did they inform you that there might be skeletal remains that you could assist in examining?
Yes, I was called to ask if I was able to go to the scene that day to participate in the initial recovery.
Now, were you present at the scene when the skull and the first bones that were found were actually removed?
No, the first day I was not available. I was not available to go to the scene, excuse me. That was finals week at University of Central Florida. I had to do an osteology final, study the skeleton, and I had to make sure I had coverage for my final before I was actually able to leave. And by that time, I think everything had already been recovered.
By everything, you mean the initial?
Correct, the initial, okay. Yes.
Did you then go, so where did you go to start assisting in this investigation?
I went directly to the medical examiner's office.
All right. Now, when you arrived there, was the skull already arrived at the medical examiner's office? Do you recall?
Honestly, I don't remember.
Okay.
If the material was already there.
What is your first recollection of seeing the skull or what it was contained in?
Well, I remember looking in the bag and seeing the skull in the bag. Did see some duct tape. I did not want to interfere with the duct tape, so I essentially tore the corners of the bag to lay the bag flat so the skull was not handled in any way.
All right. Were you present when the initial photography was done of the skull sitting in its position in the bag, once the bag is torn away?
Correct, yes, I was there.
So that was documented before it was moved in any way.
Yeah, and that was documented. The initial, I was there when it was documented, and then X-rays were already, I don't remember when the X-rays were completed, since I was assisting, I was not in charge. And I do remember at one point during the photography process, I held the skull up so photographs could be taken of the underside of the skull itself.
If we could publish State's Exhibit and Evidence 218. Is this one of the photographs that you're referring to where you are holding the skull so that it can be photographed?
Correct. Right at the very top of the screen, I guess it's where the blue color changes, that should be a glove of mine holding it up.
Up here?
Correct.
Well, it didn't quite work, but we got it. We got the message. All right. And again, did you observe the things that are being photographed here as far as the position of the tape and the jaw and the hair mat, et cetera?
Yes.
Let's also look at 220, which is CU, was CU. Oh, I'm sorry, that was from that's okay, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. Now, with reference to the mandible, was the mandible still, is there a term of art called anatomical position within your field?
Yes, well, anatomical position would be the normal position. If we're referring to the skeleton, the normal position the bones would be when somebody would be during life.
All right. I'm going to have him talk about it a little bit. Now, was the mandible, when the skull came in close to anatomical position?
Close. It was close.
Okay.
Okay.
Was that surprising to you?
To see a mandible still retained on the bottom of the skull from a surface recovery, yes, that was surprising.
Why is that surprising?
Generally, there needs to be something there to hold the mandible in place. Just through gravity, the mandible will normally separate once the soft tissues are no longer present.
And based on your examination of this, what was holding the mandible in place in this circumstance?
From this examination would have been if we see from the picture that's still up there, it would have been the hair that had moved to the base of the skull.
Right. Was there anything else in the hair?
Well, we can see right in the picture here, there is some leaf litter and it looks like some roots that were there.
How about the tape? What did that have any involvement in holding the mandible into place that you could see?
No, because I think the tape was adhered to the hair, but I don't recall it holding the mandible in place in this view.
All right. I'm going to unpublish the photograph at this time. Let's just take the photograph off. Now, during your examination of the initial bones that were brought in, did you find anything indicating evidence of any kind of trauma to the bones?
No, there was no evidence of trauma.
Now, did you participate in planning a thorough excavation of the site where the skull was found?
Okay. I provided an advisory role to the Sheriff's Department, but I would not call it an excavation, because an excavation would interpret we were, normally we say excavation, we're out there with trowels and we're pulling back subsurface soil layers. In this instance, I would call this a recovery because the material primarily was not buried. There were some items, but for the majority of the material was underneath the leaf litter throughout the site.
All right. Now, what was the plan for recovery? How was that done?
Okay. I had, on the 12th, I arrived at the scene in the morning and talked with Susan Mears, who was the crime scene supervisor. And we talked about how to proceed with processing this type of scene. And this scene posed numerous difficulties because we were dealing with a small child. The bones are very small. The bones, during growth, many of the bones are in multiple parts. So we had additional parts of bones that we would have to consider. Some bones had not even properly, were not completely ossified yet. And it was a heavy, heavy wooded environment. lots of surface plant material. So there are many issues we had to consider. And so we already knew where the primary area was where the skeletal remains were located. So what we decided was we would process the scene starting there. And what I instructed was everybody should be on their hands and knees. We need to be removing leaf litter. And we would be screening or double checking. All that material that was removed would go to a sifting station. So we started where the known material was and we worked out from there. It was kind of our we talked about initially. And I worked the initial location where the skeletal remains were found. I felt it was best that I started that area with Susan Mears just because I was the one that would be identifying all of the bones that were found in the field.
Now, when you say, you use the word screening, what does that mean? How is that done?
Normally when we're doing a recovery or an excavation, all of the material that would be removed would be brought over to, essentially, we use like a screening box. It would be some type of mesh on the bottom of a box, and we would put all the material in there, and then there would be one or two people working each screen, and then they would thoroughly sift through all that material. And in this instance, the sheriff had set up, I think, a secondary area. Everything that was even sifted through was sifted through again.
Now, did you advise them to use a certain kind of mesh based on the kind of bones you were looking for?
Yeah, I told them to go to a smaller size screen. I mean, I think they had two sizes, and so I'd advise them that everything should be no larger than I think what standard chicken wire is. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what that size was.
Is that because of the
The bones were so small, correct, yes.
All right, I've got some. Did you have photographs, have you seen photographs that were taken of the process that you could explain to the jury, sort of how the process went?
Say that again, please?
I'm sorry, that was a very bad question. Are there photographs that you've reviewed that show the process of this recovery to help explain to the jury exactly how it was done?
Yeah, I know the Sheriff's Department, they were the ones in charge of taking all the photographs. Like I said, I was only there as an advisory role. I was not, thank you. I was only there as an advisory role, so I was not out at the scene the whole time, but we kind of set up a protocol with them, and they would document the different steps of the recovery with photographs. Were we seeing any photographs? Or
I'm going to show you some right now.
Okay.
If we could have for the witness States Exhibit EP for identification. Do you recognize this photograph, sir?
Yes, I think this one is, Sheriff initially set up the main area. They essentially put this, whatever you want to call it, tarp thing over here. They set up over the main area. Excuse me?
Canopy.
Thank you. Yeah, canopy over the main area.
Right. And that is was set up over the main area. You talk about the main area where the skull initially was found.
Correct, where the skull was initially found. But I could not tell you which day this is since I did not take the initial photograph. And I'm assuming it's the first day, but
Does this fairly accurately depict the appearance of the process?
Yes, this is because in this instance, what we have is one of the crime scene supervisors just showing she's on her hands and knees, which is most of the time we were on our hands and knees because of small bones. They were laying flags out where items were located so they could later map them in. Yes.
Now, this mapping process, tell the jury how that worked.
Okay. I was not in charge of the mapping process. Normally what we would want to do is document the spatial relationships of where the items are found in the field, evidence. In this instance, the Sheriff's Department was mapping in a material that was found in the field. For me, they were also, mapping in all the skeletal remains. And so the whole process for them, there are multiple ways that we can actually map a scene. One of the best and most accurate ways is actually using a computerized transit, probably the total station unit. And this was part of the mapping process that was undergone by the Sheriff's Department.
And again, were you, obviously not there every day, but monitoring the progress as bones were recovered?
Ron Murdoch, if I remember correctly, was in charge of using the total station, and he did talk to me. We did discuss how that was being done. Correct.
And when remains were found, would you examine them?
Yes, if I was there. So my role, not only to advise on the recovery and to assist with some of the recovery, I was also there every day that I was in town and available. I would go out to the scene and always assess what type of bones were found or suspicious material. The sheriff needed to have an idea of which bones that were located were actually human, because one of my jobs was to assess how we needed to expand the search. So if they were finding, let's say, non-human bones, I would be able to let them know. And when they found human bones, we would discuss what was going on, which material represented human bones. This is a big part of what was involved because of this environment and the small bones.
Did the search area progressively increase based upon what was found?
Correct, yes. As we initially started in the main area, additional CSIs worked south of us, all right, also searching. And as additional human remains were located, I would talk to Susan Mears and say, okay, we're locating remains in this area, we need to expand out further, we need to make sure. So we started with a smaller area, and that area kept expanding and expanding as additional bones were located.
At this time, you ought to move into the State's Exhibit EP.
Be received in evidence, the states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
All right. Let me see when this comes up. Doctor, if you could just kind of explain to the jury what it is they're looking at here.
It hasn't changed. The image has not changed for me.
I know it won't. They can see it now. Just you could see it before, they can see it now.
Well, all I see still is the canopy picture.
That's what I want you to explain. When you were talking about it, they couldn't see it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
okay. Okay. All
Now
right.
that they can see it,
Okay.
explain what you...
That makes sense. All right. So what we're looking here is some of there are a lot of vines in the area, and like I said, I'm not sure which day this picture is from. This is just showing some of the process. And some of the process had to involve removing some of the vines and some of the overgrown plant debris, tree debris. In this area, they set up a canopy over the initial area, and we can also see, we talked about how all the debris would be collected. So we would screen that debris, and you could see there are pails out there. That's what the pails represent. All right, so every time all of the people involved that were in the field removing material, all right, they'd be on their hands and knees. They would pick up that material. They would go through it, but there's always a possibility there could be something stuck to the plant debris, and then they would place it in a pail. And that's what they're just showing, where there were pails out there. And when items were located, they would place flags out there, and the flags would have whatever number that item was given by the sheriff's department. They would document that with photographs. And because we're dealing with such small bones, the idea was we needed to remove those bones, but the flag was placed at the location where they were found, so it could be, that location could be mapped later on.
Is it important in your eventual evaluation to know where particular bones are found and in what order? When trying to understand how the skeletal remains may have been dispersed and disarticulated at a site, you would definitely need to know where all of the skeletal remains were located. And if you could explain the word disarticulated.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Disarticulated would mean when the bones are separated from their natural position. So disarticulation would occur at a joint, and then when the bone is separated at the joint.
All right. I'm going to unpublish to the jury and bring up State's Exhibit EQ. Do you recognize this photograph of the process? Again, just a
Yeah,
closer
and that's
photograph
a picture just showing where the flags are being placed. My guess is there may have been some pictures taken at this point, but we see all of the flags representing where some of the items.
It's not. Hold on a second.
No problem.
That's okay. Again, this is a picture showing that process.
Correct.
All right. This time you ought to move into evidence State's Exhibit EQ.
What says the defense? Be received in evidence as.
State's Exhibit number 242.
And may I publish?
You may publish.
Now you can describe it to the jury now that they, hold on
Okay,
one
so
second.
this is a,
Just 1 second, there's a delay. Okay, now they can see it. Go ahead and explain it to them.
all right, this would be a close-up of, I'm assuming, the earlier picture we were looking at from a different angle. And this is just showing one of the CSIs, the one that was in charge of documentation. And my guess here is she was probably, you could see on her back, there's the camera, all right? And there are flags representing locations where items were found. And I'm having a hard time seeing the picture, but I think what she's actually doing is, it looks like in her left hand that she has one of the envelopes for evidence collection. So she's probably collecting.
If you want to wait 1 second, we can actually zoom in.
Okay.
Perez, can you zoom in on the individual in the photograph, please? Okay, so that's what you're referring to.
Yes, so the location, the flag, she would have wrote down the specific number that was assigned to that piece of evidence, and that's written on the flag, so that flag can be mapped in later on, but she's removing that evidence and placing it in the envelope.
And was that in fact done in this case? A mapping system was used in order to map where each bone was found.
Each bone and whatever evidence the sheriff collected, they were continually mapping everything in this process.
All right. Thank you. Now, once bones would be found, and was part of your job to basically tell the sheriffs what was a bone and what wasn't?
Correct. And not only what was a bone and what wasn't, what was not a bone, what was non-human, and then what would be human bone.
All right. And those things that you identified as human bones would have then been transported to the medical examiner's office, is that correct?
Yes, and I know they, I think maybe even some of the non-human stuff was probably already, because I wasn't there the entire time, so some of the other non-human bones may have already, that would have been transported, and we would have looked at those bones. I would have looked at those bones at the medical examiner's office as well.
Oh, all right. If we could go on to states ER. Do you recognize this as a photograph of some of the remains that were found?
Yes, these are vertebrae.
Hold on. Before you describe it, we have to have it in evidence. Okay?
No problem.
At this time, I move into evidence, States Exhibit ER.
We received an evidence that states numbered.
243.
May I publish?
You may publish.
All right, Dr. Schultz, what are we looking at in this photograph?
We are looking at a number of vertebrae, so part of the spine. And what we can see here is the vertebrae are disarticulated, separated. They're not together anymore. There's no soft tissue. Thank you. There's no soft tissue. We can see roots growing throughout the vertebra as well. And I would like to point out that because we're dealing with a child, and I mentioned earlier how when we grow, our bones do not grow as whole units. They grow in pieces to allow the growth. So what we can see here is all of these vertebrae, except for the furthest one on the right, they're in separate pieces. But what's very important about this picture, we can see here that in order for all
Doctor, let me stop for a second. If you want to, that's a telestrator screen.
Okay.
If you need to refer to something, you can just touch the screen and circle it, and it will make a
okay.
mark.
All right,
So-
thank you. All right, so I was saying the vertebra on the my right, here we can see the back of the vertebra, so this is the body. What's interesting from my perspective when we look at this image, here's a vertebra where the body's separated. All the other ones are separated. And all of these bones were found in one location. So it would have to tell you that these bones were transported while they were still held together. Not only all the vertebrae held together, but the parts of the vertebra held together with some soft tissue.
And was this particular set of bones found at a different location than the skull?
Yes, these were found at a different location.
And we'll discuss that more later, but that's significant in terms of how they got transported.
Correct.
All right. We go on to States Exhibit ES. Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. EW was the next one we wanted on the list. I apologize. Do you recognize this particular item?
Yes.
Is that a photograph of one of the bones found that you said?
That's a photograph of a bone fragment.
A bone
And so
fragment. This time you're going to move into evidence, State's Exhibit EW.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
May I publish?
You may.
This particular bone, again, we see a bone and then we see a manila envelope, I guess, with some writing on it. Is that what you were talking about, how each bone is documented as to where it came from?
Correct.
All right. This also indicates 6 inches deeper below large roots. That's how they would indicate where they found it?
They would have information on the bag. Now, on this one, I'm not sure, but this one may have actually been found in the sift. And what they were trying to do was locate where the person that recovered these remains was in what area of the site they were at.
All right. So this was actually covered in sifting, not something that was found.
I think so, because she says lane 5, but so that's what I think this may have been a sift bone.
All right. So you said this is a fragment from another bone.
Correct.
All right. Just one moment. If we could have State's Exhibit, let me unpublished, State's Exhibit FA. Now, let me clear the annotation. Do you recognize this as a photograph of 2 of the bones that were found in the in this case?
Yes.
This time, moving to evidence, State's Exhibit FA. FA.
There being no objection, it would be received in evidence as states numbered.
245.
May I publish?
You may publish.
What are these bones that we're looking at in this exhibit?
We're looking at right now the largest bones in the body. Those would be the shafts of the femora. So those would be your lower leg bones that attach to the pelvis.
And does this, could we have a split screen between this and the last exhibit that we put in, which was EW? EW. Now, in your opinion, do these 2 bones relate to each other?
Yes, they do. If we look at the image with the 2 bones on the left, what we're looking at here, the top of the bones, these have actually been chewed on by animals. This bone here actually is a fragment that you can actually put right back into place there.
Your Honor, I want to object at this time to put a sign marker.
Okay.
I'll unpublish this while we're doing that.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and now is the time for our recess. We will be in recess to 25 to the hour of 11. I'm going to ask that you not discuss this case among yourselves. Okay, we'll be in recess.
Let's go back. We could unpublish to the jury, please. And let's go to State's Exhibit EZ. Do you recognize this as a photograph of 2 of the bones that were found during the recovery?
Yes.
This time, got to move into evidence, State's Exhibit EZ.
Be received in evidence.
247.
You wish to publish.
I do. Now, these particular bones, is there some significance to these bones that you would like to describe to the jury?
These bones represent part of the pelvis. So if you were to, with your hands, palpate your waist, you generally would be palpating the top area of your pelvis. So since we're dealing with a child, each one of these, they're called oscoxa, would grow as 3 bones. and then through the maturity process, they would fuse. So what we're looking at are the top parts of each os coxa. This one here, we do have some carnivore damage on the bottom and some adipocere here as well.
And what is adipocere?
Adipocere would just be a conversion of fats in the body into essentially a wax.
Is, in your overall opinion of the taphonomy of this case, is where one of these bones was found significant?
One of these, yes, was found almost completely buried in the muck.
And that's, you're going to explain later why that's significant.
Yes.
Okay. Which one of these was that?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I'd
Okay.
have to check notes.
That's fine. Do you need to check your notes? Go ahead.
The left. Left.
The left in this picture?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Judge, if we could unpublish now, please. And if I could have State's Exhibit FC. Now, Doctor, do you recognize this photograph?
Yes, that is a picture of the skeleton laid out essentially in anatomical order after all of the bones are recovered.
And at this time, you got to move to evidence State's Exhibit FC.
No objection, Your Honor.
Be received evidence the state's number
248.
published.
Yes, please. Doctor, how successful was this recovery effort?
Generally, when we're recovering a skeleton that's not only been dispersed at a site, but it's also been susceptible to dispersal from carnivore activity, even with an adult skeleton where bones are completely intact, it's very difficult to collect the majority of the skeletal remains, and it's also very difficult to to collect many of the teeth. I feel we were very, very successful here. We collected all but one tooth. We have most of the spine, many of the ribs, all the long bones, and then the tiny bones, hands, feet, left foot, and we did recover one bone of the right foot. The only reason we had one bone of the right foot because there was carnivore activity in that part of the skeleton.
And the only part missing is the
For the most part, there are a few pieces here and there missing.
take it down. I've had enough of that. So this 9-day effort, would you say that it was a successful effort in terms of your experience with this kind of recovery efforts?
Yes, I would say very successful in terms of what was recovered and mapping the location of all those bones as well.
And were you provided with the information and the mapping about where the various bones were?
Yes, Ronald Murdoch, one of the CSI supervisors of the Sheriff's Department, he was in charge of the mapping, and he had provided me with all the locations.
Right. And is that the type of information that you would normally utilize in coming to an opinion as to taphonomy and forensic anthropology?
When you say type of information, can you specify, please?
Is it the type of information that you as an expert would normally use in coming to opinions?
Yes, we would need to know spatial relationships of all of the bones out at the site in relationship to the dump site, and we would want to have things mapped out.
Right. Forensic show the witness, State's Exhibit QG. Do you recognize this as a survey containing, which denotes the specific areas where various groupings of bones were found?
Yes.
Would it be helpful to you to use this in explaining to the jury the dispersal of the various bones?
Yes.
This time you ought to move into evidence State's Exhibit QG.
I have no objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit will be received in evidence the state's numbered published.
Please. Now, Mr. Perez, if we could zoom in on this area. clear the annotation. Now, doctor, does this part of the survey essentially give us all of the areas where bones were found?
Yes, it does.
Okay. If you could just explain, and do you have a specific listing of what was found in each area?
In terms of the bones, yes.
Okay. Well, if you need to refer to that to refresh your recollection, just let us know you're doing it and go right ahead.
What I would like to do when I explain this is just provide a generalization of the different bones, not provide an itemized list because
Absolutely
it'd
fine.
be too long. Okay.
Just
All right.
start with Area A. What is Area A?
Okay. Area A, do I need to highlight here?
If you want to, you may.
Okay. Area A in the image here is going to be what we feel is probably most likely the primary depositional area. So where the body and mass of bags, the body being in the bags, was placed into the woods. This would have been where the initial separation of some of the body parts occurred, such as the skull, the arms, the lower limbs would have separated here. And then what we're able to do is, as I walk through here, is talk about how the skeleton, as it was dispersed at the scene, we can follow along with which parts were actually separated at specific locations. And so if we look at when I was working with the Sheriff's Department, advising them on which areas to focus our efforts and how to expand, I initially started in Area A, and then we had people in Area B, not Area B, but south of Area A. So if we're looking at this picture, north would be the top of the image. So when we initially started with our search, I was with Susan Mears in Area A. The rest of the crime scene investigators were south of us. And as additional skeletal remains were found, we moved further south.
Okay, just one second. If you want to designate a new area of search, you can do it in a different color.
Well, I'm just doing a generalization, okay,
Right.
because this whole entire area was searched. So what I'm trying to say is, as we were in Area A, we also had people outside here working across this way. And then when this entire area was searched, what I would do is talk to Susan Mears, go through with her what the progress was for the day. We'd talk about where skeletal remains were located, and then we would talk about how to expand the search. So for example, as Area F, Area G, more material was found, the search progressed further south. All right, and as it was progressing south, what I did at that point was we talked in terms of where bones were located, and I said we needed to expand west and east, and that's how we located additional bones further out.
So was this a further progressive?
Yeah, so we want to start with the known and then progress out from the known and keep expanding till no more bones are located.
So once you got to a point where you weren't finding anything, then?
Well, when that whole area was completely cleared, okay, and cleared means surface debris, and even the ground was going to be scraped with trowels, all right?
And that was done over this entire area that you've?
Yes, yes. And the sheriff would be able to provide the exact location,
Sure.
all right? All I was provided, I worked with Ron Murdoch to produce this map, and all I told him was I wanted the location for where all the bones were found on a scene map where I could then talk about dispersal and what we're discussing now.
Very good. Let me get rid of your annotations here for a moment. So generally what was found in Area A? As far as
Area
skeletal remains?
Area A would have been, sorry?
Just a second. You cannot talk at the same time. There's a question. Let there be a break, then let there be a moderate, deliberate answer. If not, the court reporter will not be able to take a thing down, and the record will be shot. Proceed.
Yes, sir. So tell us, if you will, what skeletal remains were found in Area A?
Area A was the initial area where they located the skull, the bags, where additional bones that were found there. As a generalization, the arms with hand bones were found there. The lower legs were also found there with the left foot.
How about area B, the area closest to A? What was found there?
Left B was the shaft for the upper arm bone, the humerus.
All right. And the next closest, I guess, would be area, or the biggest area, area F. What was found there?
As we progressed further, I guess that would be a southeastern direction. In area F, what we can see happened here, the trunk of the body with the pelvis and the lower legs more than likely was dragged to this area, because what we see only in this area, we see primarily there are some additional bones, but we do find both lower leg bones and part of the pelvis, and some other bones are located here as well.
And those would be a connected anatomical unit.
Yes, so at this point we probably have being dragged away from area A by an animal or animals would be the trunk with the lower, both femora attached to the pelvis, still all articulated.
All right. What further dispersal can you describe for this diagram?
Okay. Well, I just wanted to point out area D. All right. That's the area where we had only located one bone.
This is over to the far left of the diagram, is that correct?
Yeah, and that's the only bone we found for the right foot, and that did exhibit carnivore damage, which documented what we believed clearly was going on at this site. That area D, animals had dispersed, and we said, if we then go back to area E, we didn't talk about area E, that was a hand bone found there.
Let me ask you one question before about area D before you get off that. You said that was the one bone, is that the one bone of the foot that no other bones were found?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so go ahead. You were going to, I think, area E. Is that what's the next one you're talking about?
Yes, area E was just one hand bone.
That's off here in the top of the picture. That's area E?
Correct. Yes, that's area E.
Okay. You told us about area F. How about area G?
Okay. If I could just explain further, area F is where, area F is where we did see carnivore damage on multiple bones. And area G, all right, at this point to area G, we more than likely had most of the spinal column, so most of the vertebra still together with many of the ribs attached. And what we see separating out at this area would be the bottom of the spinal column, or the lower vertebrae that would have separated here.
And that's in area G?
Correct, area G.
Again, is that consistent with, again, an animal moving?
Yes, yeah, still be consistent. Like I said, there was damage to the pelvis area. That part of the spinal column would attach to the pelvis, make a part of the pelvis.
How about area H?
Area H, we start to see more of the ribs that are disarticulated or separated at this point. Okay, and yeah, so ribs. There are some other little bones, but I'll just if I just use a generalization, like I said, I would.
Sure. How about area I? I guess is the last one we.
Yes, area I. At this point, we have not up until area H. We haven't seen most of the spine. So what's interesting about area I is, if we start at the top of the spine, we first have the cervical vertebra, 7 of those. Then we go to the thoracic vertebra, 12. And then we go to the lumbar vertebra, 5. So that's 24 vertebra. If we go to area I, we found 20 of the vertebra there. So this would be consistent at this point as the trunk is being dragged through the woods. The bones that are not held on with as many potential ligaments. There's going to be more ligaments helping to support the spinal column to hold it together. So it's consistent with that part of the spinal column being dragged while it's relatively articulated. And as I mentioned earlier, almost all of these vertebra may even be 2 parts, because they have not fused yet due to growth. So it's consistent with this potentially as a whole anatomical unit, a whole block being dragged to area I where decomposition would have occurred, continued there, finished.
In order for that to occur, would it be correct that the skeleton would not have to be completely skeletonized. There had to be some tissue connecting these bones in order for them to be moved as a unit.
Yes, there would have had to have been some tissue holding the bones together, correct.
Have we covered all the areas now? I think we have.
Yes, we spoke about all the areas.
All right. Now, based upon this dispersal pattern, do you have an opinion as to whether this body was deposited in Area A as a complete intact unit?
It may have been relatively intact. I don't know exactly if it was a complete unit because it would have been in the bags, but it would have been, we still would have had, if we look clearly at Area F, clearly the trunk and lower legs would have still been all articulated. I couldn't tell you if all the other parts, whether or not they had separated yet, the ones that were found in the locations closer to the road.
Just so we're clear, there's no indication that the body was dismembered by using any kind of tool or anything like that?
No, we did not see any evidence.
Right. Whatever separation occurred was through the natural process of decomposition.
Correct, would have been natural.
Now, based upon the dispersal pattern, and there was one particular bone that we talked about, the hip bone, and I forget what your technical term for it was, that we talked about in one photograph, you said was buried in something. Can you explain to the jury what the significance of the way that bone was found is to your ultimate opinion about taphonomy?
When trying to interpret how long the bones may have been at the site and also how they were dispersed.
Okay. You may continue.
Actually, before he answers, I realize I have not gone through the formal process. I would ask the court to recognize the witness as an expert in the area of forensic anthropology to give opinions in the area, though he's already done that. I've never formally requested, so I would at this time.
Any objections, Mr. Mason? The witness will be accepted as an expert witness in the areas tended by the prosecution.
Thank you. So explain to us about this particular bone and its significance in your opinion.
Ilium?
Yes, the ilium, the left ilium.
When trying to interpret the dispersal at the scene and how long the skeleton may have been out at the scene, many of the bones were located underneath the leaf fall. So that would let us know that the bones had to have been there prior to the leaf fall. And then we had, particularly with his ilium, the bone was nearly buried. So that would at least have to tell us, more than likely, this area was, I guess simplest way to may say it was a swampy area. There was water south or southeast. And so it's quite possible that when the area was filled up with water, the whole area was flooded, that as somehow the action from the water, silt, or other material that may have been suspended in the water may have resulted in the burial of this particular bone, which would have occurred sometime over the summer.
Now, when you say buried, can you describe more how you mean, how it was found? Was it deep down in the dirt? Was it just in the mud? How was it?
Okay, it was close to a big palmetto trunk, and which was I think was one of the lower areas. I cannot give you an exact measurement, but I know area F, if we looked at the topographic map, that is the lowest area. So more than likely when the whole trunk was brought in there, that is one of the bones with carnivore damage. Somehow it was deposited in that particular location. And there's going to be silt and other material suspended in water as water moves, be picked up, and that process would have eventually led to almost burying this bone.
Now, based upon all of this evidence that you've seen here, that you've discussed, Do you have an opinion as to the taphonomy in this case, as to approximately how long you believe these remains were in that area?
Okay. When we're trying to interpret time since death, we're going to use, like I was talking about, multiple lines of evidence. This is one of the reasons why we want to document the location of all the bones, trying to understand the dispersal. And overall, the bones were dry, all right, which would suggest it dry, not only completely free of soft tissue, but dry. Bones are all going to have marrow in them. There's going to be fat in them. So even when the tissue first decomposes off the bones can still have a moist touch. There can also still be decomposition odor. So these bones were completely dry. They were not, no decomposition odor. There was some slight erosion on many of the bones, which would take time. Found under the leaf litter, one bone was practically buried. In combination of that with some of the root evidence, what I pretty much said in my report, it would not be a period of around 6 months could be possible.
All right. And is it your opinion, based upon, again, the examination of this, that the dispersal of the bones was a result of animal activity?
I would say primarily a result of animal activity when we're finding animal activity directly on the bones in some of these areas. And I don't, off the top of my head, I need to look at my report, at least on one of them. I mean, there was some animal chewing even on a couple of the ribs that we did know. And, that's one thing. This area was processed very well. They were all missing bones, and they were, in this instance, taken away by animals. They could have been chewed and nothing left of the bone after that.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
You ready?
Yes.
Now, as a forensic anthropologist, amongst the things you do is not only help or direct the location of bones, but you examine the bones yourself.
Correct.
And did you, in fact, x-ray bones?
The bones were x-rayed.
Something you directed?
We normally, when I work a case, I will always ask, okay, do we have these x-ray views? And if not, I will ask for them.
In your examination of the bones and the x-raying of the bones, sir, isn't it true you found no evidence of any pre-mortem trauma?
No, there was no evidence of perimortem trauma.
Meaning no prior childhood broken bones, fractures, any such thing?
Are you asking antemortem trauma?
I'm sorry?
I'm not sure if your question, if you were asking, did we find, I think you asked me two separate questions.
All right, well,
Okay, go ahead.
let me start over. Sometimes the acoustics in here are weird and I can't hear well anyway, so. You found no evidence of any fractures, correct?
No evidence of fractures.
And no evidence of any twists or torquing of bones?
No, no evidence.
No evidence of anything to indicate to you that this child had ever had any traumatic injury whatsoever before her death?
No evidence.
Now, sir, you have before you, or did you give him a paper copy of the map?
There's a paper copy of the map, Council, right there on the table.
May I?
You saw it on the screen.
Yes.
Thank you. Print on that too small for me to attempt to read, sir. Would you look at it? Can you tell us how far area A was from the pavement of the road, Suburban Drive?
If I use the scale, like I said, I did not do the mapping, but if I use the scale on the mapping, without having a ruler in front of me, I would think 25 to 30 feet maybe,
Area
to the edge of the road, right?
A, did you participate in the measurements at all?
I did not, no, I said that earlier. I did not document the measurements. The measurements were collected with a total station, and they also had a 3D scanner.
So this map only shows different elevations and lines that would show the elevations?
Yes, and the total state, excuse me, a 3D scanner was brought in, and that's what I said earlier. I did not do the measurements. My job was not the mapping. The measurements were provided to me.
Who provided the measurements to you?
Ronald Murdoch. Ronald Murdoch. And he didn't, what he provided to me was, he didn't necessarily provide measurements. The way that map was created, him and I looked through all of the data points for each of the flags, and then I came up with the different locations based on the concentration of bones, and then that map was created for me.
Okay, so when I ask you if you know specifically how far the beginning of area A and where the skull was from the edge of the pavement, you can't tell me.
If you give me a ruler, I could.
Well, fresh out. Okay. Do you know, sir, when the disbursement took place?
I'm not sure I understand the question when you say when.
Well, we start with area A. And area A, you say, was the primary site where the skull, the bags, arms, hand bone, lower leg bone, and so forth are located, right?
Yes.
Okay. And all of those items were in bags, right?
Originally, yes.
Originally, before you had to reconstruct it and set it out as you did in the exhibit.
Well, I would assume when I say in bags originally, when deposited out at the site.
Okay. And from the site was gathered the plastic bags, the laundry bag, the skull with bones in it. You know that, you saw it.
Correct.
All right. But the other areas where there were some bones or fragments, there were no bags, correct?
No bag. Well, excuse me. No bags. I could not tell you parts of bags. That I could not tell you, since that was not my job to analyze that material.
So then the majority of what would be found and in a bag and so forth was all area A, right?
Can you repeat that,
The
please?
majority of the skull and the bones that we talked about, the majority of it was in the bags from area A.
I wouldn't necessarily say majority, and I would say found in the area. Okay. What you're referring to, I would say correct. The majority of that skeleton material was found in the area of A.
And it was only after inspecting the content of the remains from area A that you discovered there's missing bones, right?
I don't know. I wouldn't agree with that, because we would too when we started processing the scene. We did have people in other areas of the scene we were processing at the same time, and people were locating additional bones in south of area A before we had area A completely processed.
The initial find was area A.
Correct.
Okay. Then after looking what you got, then you spread it out. You drew a map where you said, go east, go south, go west.
We had a whole crew of people, so we separated them out in different areas, and we were searching simultaneously.
And that's when some found different bones and little pieces, as you have shown us.
Yes.
And then brought them back, and you did your best to reassemble the skeleton.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, you don't have any scientific evidence to tell us when the first disbursement from Area A occurred, do you?
I cannot provide you a specific time period, no.
And same question as to areas B, C, D, E, F, G, and I.
Yes.
And there's nothing in your work, and in this case, that tells you how this child died. Isn't that correct, sir?
That's not a question that I would answer, and I did not. All I would look for would be perimortem trauma, and we did not find any perimortem trauma.
And when you studied some of the remains and looked at duct tape, you did, right?
On the skull, I did not analyze it. I looked at the duct tape on the skull, but I did not look at and analyze the duct tape itself.
And duct tape was not covering the nasal aperture, was it, sir?
No.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Redirect.
What's a nasal aperture? What's a nasal aperture?
Nasal aperture is the hole on the skull where the nasal area would be.
So it's what, if you took everything else away, the opening where the nose would be.
Correct. If you were to remove the nose, the nasal aperture would be that hole. Correct.
And the tape wasn't covering the entire nasal aperture. Is that what you said?
The tape was covering the mouth area.
The mouth area.
Yeah.
Do you know whether the tape was in a position where it would have covered the nose had it been there, or do you just don't know?
Possibly, but based on what I saw, there's no way to say that exactly.
Okay. Because not to be indelicate, the nose wasn't there anymore.
Correct.
I'm going to need to, if I may have just a moment, what is the full skeleton? And that is, could I publish 248 in evidence, Judge, please?
Yeah. As soon as it gets up on the screen.
Sir.
Publish 248.
Mr. Mason asked you a question and used the word the majority of the bones be in one place or another. If you could circle on this, what bones were found in Area A to the best of, generally?
Can I refer to my notes?
Refer to your report, that'd be fine.
And this is not an exact?
Sure.
Okay.
Just in general.
Yeah, so we have skull area here. This was not, but we had some of the bones in here.
Okay. Just in a general sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a general.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. Let me look here. I forgot here. Sorry about that. And we may have something here. I'd have to refer specifically to notes. One of the fibula may have been there, but.
That's fine. So generally, that's what was in Area A.
Correct.
All right. What was in Area? Get my glasses too. What was in Area B?
When I put the X on the left humerus, before I said that was not there because that was located.
That was in the area closest to
Yes,
Area A.
yes, close by.
Right. Sorry. That was in Area B, the closest to Area A, correct?
Yes, that would be correct.
Right. What was in Area F? That was the larger area on the diagram.
Area F, it appears a little larger because the dispersal was out a little further. But in Area F, we do have the clavicles, which are your collarbones. And then we have parts of the pelvis and the proximal ends of both femora, okay, the shafts. And we do have some ribs.
All right.
And one part of a vertebra.
That's in area F, correct?
Yes.
All right. What parts do we have in area G?
Area G, what we see in area G is that's where we see some separation of the bottom or distal end of the spinal column there. And then area G, we had a couple ribs.
Okay. How about area H?
Area H, we only had one part of one rib, part of one vertebra, sorry. And then we had a bunch of ribs, and I don't have exact ones in
That's
front of
fine.
me.
And how about area I?
Area I, we see more ribs, but I don't have the exact vertebra, but we had close to 20, we had 20 vertebra, parts representing 20 vertebra.
We can get rid of that photo now, please. No further questions.
Any recross as to those issues? May the doctor be excused. Thank you, doctor. You may be excused, sir.
Thank you.